Welcome to the Built with Grace podcast, and thanks for joining us on our study, God Shows Up, a study on God's timing. God's timing is always perfect, but not always comfortable. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review and share this with your friends. This helps us get the word out to more people. Also, leave your email address if you would like information on upcoming study guides. Chapter 9 God Shows Up When I Need to Be Heard. God Sighting. God shows up during our deepest times of distress. He hears us during those times we've failed or been a victim, and He provides a way through the wilderness. Are you listening to me? If I had a nickel for every time I heard my father say that, I could buy an island in the Caribbean and live the rest of my life in comfort. Dad's statement was fair. I'd heard him talking, but I wasn't really listening until I heard that line again. Have you ever had that happen? You've been talking with someone and come to the realization that they weren't listening. You know they heard you. If you asked them to repeat what you said, they would be able to repeat every word. But hearing and listening are two completely different things. Jesus describes people like this as having ears that don't hear. Ironically, the people that seemed to suffer most from unhearing ears were the religious elite. In their defense, it's always much easier to hear what we want to hear than the things that go against our established opinions. All of us want to be heard. When we don't feel like we're being heard, it affects how we view others, how we respond to adversity, and more importantly, how we value ourselves. When we don't feel heard, we become lonely, sad, frustrated, or even angry. Relationships suffer when one or both parties in a conflict don't feel as though they're truly being heard. On the other hand, when we feel listened to and understood, we feel valued. When you feel valued, you can endure the most difficult of situations. Take Hagar, for instance. In most evangelical churchy circles, Hagar gets a bum rap. In case her name doesn't ring a bell, let me give you the short story. One day, God came to a man named Abram and said he would bless Abram and his wife Sarai with a baby. Not only that, but that baby, that child of promise, would make Abram a father of many nations with such strength that Abram would be great. As a sign of that, he would later change Abram's name to Abraham. Abram means exalted father, but Abraham means father of many nations. This was pretty cool. But even more amazing was the fact that Sarai, meaning princess, was childless and beyond childbearing age. God would change her name to Sarah, the mother of many nations. While all this is pretty exciting, there was one major problem. Sarai didn't get pregnant. For nearly 10 years, nothing happened to prove God's promise was legit. God called Abram his friend, but without a baby, that promise was getting a little empty. Like many of us, Sarai and Abraham became impatient. God's timing is rarely our timing, so the couple did what any of us would do. They took matters into their own hands. Enter Hagar, stage right. When Abram and Sarah visited Egypt, Abram tried to save his own hide by passing Sarai off as his sister to Pharaoh. Pharaoh gladly welcomed her into his harem until God sent plagues on Pharaoh and revealed to him Sarai's true identity. Pharaoh confronted Abram and kicked him out of Egypt and gave him many gifts in his departure. It was during this time that tradition says Hagar was given to Abram and Sarai. She was treated as property. She was transported from a life of nobility to the nomadic life of a shepherd. She went from living a life of comfort in a palace to living in a tent. She went from a life of relative freedom to becoming the servant of Sarai. When it became apparent to Abram and Sarai that God needed a little help with the promise of his timing, Abram and Sarah hatched a plan to help God out. Sarai gave Hagar to Abram. He slept with her, and behold, she became with child. God's work was done. Or was it? Once Hagar realized she could do what Sarah couldn't, she began to flaunt her pregnancy to Sarai and all those around her. Lesson to be learned here. God doesn't need our help. His timing isn't ours, and usually, if not always, taking things into our own hands always leads to bad news. Needless to say, Hagar's in-your-face Sarai attitude didn't sit well with Sarai. The conflict between the two women escalated to a boiling point, and Sarai confronted Abram. Then Sarai said to Abram, "This is all your fault. I put my servant in your arms, but now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show you who's wrong, you or me." Abram replied, "Look, she's your servant, so deal with her as you see fit." So Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. Genesis 16:5 and 6. Hagar went from being Sarai's servant to being Abram's wife, back to being Sarai's servant. The joy of bearing a child was huge during these times, but not with this child. Hagar's pregnancy was quickly moving from being a joyful experience to a huge source of conflict and pain. Hagar had lost the support of Abram and was under daily attack from a bitter, angry, and emotionally abusive Sarai. She saw no hope of anything good coming from this, so Hagar decided to take her chances in the wilderness. At some point on her journey, Hagar sat down and rested by a pool of water on the way to Shur. This was a main road to Egypt. Hagar was defeated, abused, pregnant, confused, and heading home. Home, where her life with Pharaoh was better than the difficult life she was living now. When life in the present is hard, our first inclination is to return to the past, even if the past wasn't all that great. Ask any elderly person and they'll tell you the good old days weren't really all that good after all. Then God shows up. The angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring of water in the wilderness along the road to Shur. The angel said to her, "Hagar, Sarai's servant, where have you come from and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai," she replied. Genesis 16:7 and 8. Three interesting things about God showing up at this point. First of all, when he asked Hagar where she was going, she responded with why she was going. She never said anything about the where. Pure conjecture here, but I think the reason Hagar doesn't answer the where is because she doesn't know. Sometimes when we're under attack, we move away from the pain without purpose. We move towards next steps rather than think about the ramifications of our actions. Hard as life was with Hagar, it appears that her struggle was emotional, not physical. She was still getting 3 meals a day. Tradition and extra-biblical sources imply that Abram loved Hagar. She was bearing his child, after all. But Hagar reacted rather than responded to the situation with Sarai. The second thing about Hagar's interaction with God was that he sent her back into an emotionally abusive situation. It's important to see, however, that she was sent back with a promise. God promised Abram that his child, born from Sarai, would be a child of promise. However, he gave Hagar a promise as well. She was to go back and submit to an abusive Sarai, but with a promise that he would be with her and that this baby would be a child of a great nation as well. Lastly, while Abram, Sarai, and Hagar seemed to recognize the union of Abram and Hagar, God did not. While he would care for Hagar and the new baby, his promise to Abram would not be affected by the actions of Sarai and Abram. He's not judgmental, nor is his plan affected by our attempts to do his work. Our actions simply don't affect his actions. The child of promise would be a child that would eventually bring peace to the world. Hagar's child would be a child of conflict. It's his name that is the most important here. His name would be Ishmael, which means God hears. Even though this child was a child born of disobedience, Abram's and Hagar's, God would bless. It's hard to digest. Sometimes God blesses us, even if we haven't followed him completely. Hagar gave God the name Jehovah El Roi, the God who sees me. When she gave birth, she named her boy Ishmael as God instructed. Ishmael means the God who hears me. Feeling seen and feeling heard basically have the same meaning. Both phrases refer to being understood by someone else in a significant and empowering way. Every time Hagar looked at her son, she would remember that no matter how tough life got, Jehovah El Roi was there for her. He not only listened, he heard. He really heard. She didn't escape his notice, not for 1 second. The same is true for each of us, you know. We may lose sight of God, but he never loses sight of us. Fast forward about 14 years. Ishmael, Abram's only son, had no doubt learned much from his father. As was the custom of the day, he would have learned to hunt, learned to be a herdsman, and learned military and leadership skills. Again, from extra-biblical sources, we know that Abram loved Ishmael in spite of the circumstances surrounding his birth. Then God showed up, again, this time in a way that was both miraculous and troubling. Sarai became pregnant, not in the couple's timing, but in God's perfect timing. God appeared to both Abram and Sarah about a year before the blessed event occurred and reminded them of his promise of a son and made it clear that this son, Isaac, would be the child of promise, not the older of Abram's sons, Ishmael. This was completely against the culture of the day. The elder son was always the son of blessing and promise, but God's number one is often society's also ran. It's at this time that Jehovah El Roi changed Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah. Ishmael was 14 when his little brother arrived. We aren't told much about life in Abraham's tent during these years, but I think we can assume there was tension thick enough to cut with a knife. It's also safe to assume that it didn't get better once Isaac was born. Hagar lost the one thing she could hold over Sarah. I have a baby and you don't. And Ishmael? Well, if you have younger siblings, you probably already get it. They can be annoying. Ishmael wasn't the only one annoyed as time went on. Sarah became more and more annoyed at the mere sight of Ishmael and Hagar. When Isaac was about to be weaned, Abraham planned a huge feast to celebrate. During the feast, Sarah noticed that Ishmael was mocking Isaac and had enough. After a painful discussion, Abraham sent Hagar away to the wilderness again, this time with her 16-year-old son. Once the water ran out, Hagar helped her dying son to some shade. She found a place where she couldn't see him because she couldn't bear to watch him die. While not the son of promise, Ishmael was still much loved by Hagar, Abraham, and God. I can imagine he looked like his father and was a constant reminder of the pain and joy she'd shared with Abraham over the past 16 years. Now it appears all that was over until God showed up again. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called out to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What's the matter, Hagar? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. Genesis chapter 21, 17 through 20. Hagar's story reminds us that our sovereign God, our God we don't always understand, our God who sometimes seems distant, is a God that hears us even when we may not think so, and even when we are dying in the wilderness. The first time El Roi heard her, he gave her a promise and sent her back to live in the protection and provision of Abraham in spite of the conflict with Sarah. The second time El Roi heard her, he reminded her of her promise and sent her forward, trusting in his own provision and protection to face the unknown challenges ahead. I can't imagine the loneliness Hagar felt in her life after Egypt. On the one hand, Abraham was a godly, successful friend of God. He's a man of integrity and character. Until Hagar became pregnant, it was probably a pretty good place for her to be in her life. We live in a global mindset time. We can travel from wherever we are to anywhere else in the world in a matter of hours. Hagar's world was much smaller yet much harder to travel in. Heading into the wilderness both times must have been difficult. No roads or road signs. It was largely a nomadic lifestyle, and nomads weren't always the most friendly, especially to women traveling alone with children. It must have been an extremely emotional time. In all of the Bible, I don't know of any book that deals with human emotions better than the Book of Psalms. Not only was David a master of writing, he was also well experienced with trauma of life and the feeling of abandonment we can get from El Roi. Psalm 61 is likely written while David was on the run from Absalom. For that story, read chapter 5. For now, suffice it to say both David and Hagar had something in common. They were on the run in the wilderness and no doubt wondering where God was at this time. Psalm 61, 1 through 4, the People's Translation. O God, hear my prayer. Listen to my heart's cry. For no matter where I am, I'm far from home. I will cry out for you for a father's help. When I'm feeble and overwhelmed by life, guide me into your glory. When I am safe and sheltered, Lord, you are the paradise of protection to me. You lift me high above the fray. None of my foes can touch me when I'm held firmly in your wraparound presence. Keep me in this glory. Let me live continually under your splendor shadow, hiding my life in you forever. What lessons can we learn from the life of Hagar and our God who hears? O God, hear my prayer and listen to my heart's cry, Psalm 61:1. I serve a God who listens to my heart. Say that out loud. If you're alone, it might be creepy with people around. The heart typically refers to our center of emotions and feelings. It's the heart that is a source of despair, loneliness, doubt, fear of the unknown, and times when God seems distant during our times of prayer. Jehovah El Roi really listens to you because he understands the human heart. Hagar wasn't innocent. She taunted Sarah. Ishmael wasn't innocent. He was involved in sibling rivalry. Yet in their struggle, El Roi not only heard their physical cry, he heard the cries of their heart. We don't know how long the two wandered in the wilderness. We aren't told what their conversation was or if they had any idea where they were going. What we do know from human nature is that they felt rejected, alone, and once the water ran out, they felt hopeless. As the heat of the day began to affect Ishmael and he began to stumble, they both knew their time was short. Hagar had to be wondering where El Roi was now. Where was this promise he'd given? I can't imagine the emotions this mom felt as she helped her young son over to a bush so he could die with some comfort. Not able to watch her son die, she went away to cry. Then El Roi showed up again. But God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, Hagar, what's wrong? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. When his people cry out in fear and despair, God tends to respond in ways that can be somewhat confusing. Such was the case with Hagar. Here she is, having been kicked out of the family of Abraham, left on her own as a single mom in a vast wilderness. The one linked to life with Abraham, a man that she'd grown to love, is dying over there under the bush. And El Roi's response, Hey Hagar, what's wrong? Don't worry about this. I got this. Hagar was doing what we all do when God seems AWOL. God promises us over and over in his word that he would love us unconditionally, protect us with his power, and empower us to conquer every obstacle in our path. Hagar had seen him provide time and again, but in the emotion of the moment, forgot all that he had told her. El Roi knows your heart. He knows your pain. He knows your struggle. Yet he often waits until it seems all hope is gone to reveal himself. Don't ask me to explain it. I just point to the promise of his word as my only basis for my belief. David writes in Psalm 139:7, I can never escape from your spirit. I can never get away from your presence. He states that in Psalm 61 as well. For no matter where I am even when I am far from home, I will cry out to you for my Father's help. If you have ever shopped in a large store at Christmas with a toddler in tow, you know how easy it is to lose sight of someone. 1 minute they're under your feet, a few seconds later they're completely out of sight. It's amazing to think that with all the distractions in our life, nothing takes El Roi's attention away from where we are in life. God heard the lad crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What's the matter with you, Hagar? Don't fear, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. It's our human tendency to wander away from God. We think we know better than God, although we'd never say that out loud. We're enticed by the shiny objects of social urgings. We follow our hearts, which is one of the most dangerous things to follow, as God tells us the heart is deceitful and wicked. There are other times, however, when our situation is the result of wandering or other people. Hagar and Ishmael were in the place they were because of the wandering of Abraham and Sarai. While not directly their fault, it was their condition nonetheless. Even so, Ishmael lay dying under that bush in the wilderness. As Hagar cried out at the thought of losing the one thing she couldn't bear to lose, even here El Roi heard them. They were far from the promise, far from the man she loved and the father he loved. They were hurt angry and afraid, but Elroy heard them where they were. Again from Psalms. He will listen to the prayers of the destitute. He will not reject their pleas. Psalm 102:17. The third thing we can learn from the life of Hagar is that Elroy listens to our need. Our desire for things is a driving factor in the amount of debt each person has incurred. Needs and wants are sometimes painfully different. The reality of that is difficult to accept. In the midst of her despair, God reminded her of his promise and encouraged her to move on. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, so she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. So Genesis 21:19 and 20. Whether God created a well for Hagar and Ishmael or she simply missed it in her despair, we don't know. Either way, God knew their need. The provision was much more than water because the water would run out again. The bigger gift Elroy gave them that day was the gift that each of us can rely on every day, regardless of the wilderness we're in. While the water was physically refreshing, the encouragement and promise of Elroy empowered Hagar and Ishmael to move forward. Again from the Psalm of David, Lord, you are a paradise of protection for me. You lift me high above the fray. None of my foes can touch me when I'm held firmly in your wraparound presence. Keep me in this glory. Let me live continually under your splendor shadow, hiding my life in you forever. Pause in his presence. From this point forward, we know little about Hagar and Ishmael in the Bible, but from her life we can be reminded Elroy listens to your heart, listens to where you are, and listens to your need. So remember, God shows up during our deepest times of distress. He hears us during those times we've failed or been a victim, and he provides a way through the wilderness. Thanks for listening to this edition of God Shows Up. I hope it's been an encouragement to you in your walk with Jesus. Please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, as this will increase our listenership. And reach out to me by email if you have any questions or prayer requests. Thanks again for listening, and have a blessed day.